If you were born between 1986 and 1990, you spent your whole life sitting between two generations and belonging fully to neither. Not quite an 80s kid, not quite a 90s kid. Culture never gave you a clean label, but psychology did. And what it found about this specific birth window is more significant than most people inside it have ever been told. You had a fully analog childhood. Real boredom, long summers with nothing to do, nobody reachable. You found things out slowly, through friends, through word of mouth, through the kid in your neighborhood who seemed to know everything. Your brain built its entire foundational architecture in that environment. Its sense of self, its emotional baseline, how the social world works. Then, during your adolescence and early adulthood, that world was almost entirely replaced. The technology changed. The communication changed. The economy changed. And it didn't happen gradually the way previous generations experienced it. One thing at a time over decades. It happened in a single compressed window, your 20s. Developmental psychologists call this a cohort effect, the principle that historical conditions during formative years leave a structural imprint on psychology. Not a habit, an actual change in how the brain is wired. Most generations get one cohort effect. This window absorbed two. Childhood wired them for patience, presence, and slow information. Early adulthood rewired them for speed, digital access, and permanent connectivity. In 2008, economists found that people who experience economic collapse during their formative years don't just recover and move on. The experience changes their relationship to financial security at a structural level. It persists for life. For the 1986 to 1990 cohort, that collapse hit at age 18 to 22. Your first apartment, your first job, the first time you tried to build something that looked like adult life, and the floor dropped. You are not anxious about financial security because of a personal flaw. You are not resistant to certain kinds of risk because you are overly cautious. Your relationship to money and stability was calibrated by the specific conditions of the moment you became an adult. That calibration is not irrational. It is the most rational possible response to what actually happened to you at the exact moment it happened. Here is what this birth window actually produced. You speak two languages, not linguistic, but cognitive and cultural. You are fluent in an analog world and a digital one because you are required to learn both from scratch, in real time, without a guide, in the middle of your own development. No other cohort has that. Older generations have one. Younger generations have one. You have both. From the inside. You know what boredom actually feels like. The long, unplugged version. The kind that younger cohorts have almost no experience with. That capacity lives in you, the ability to sit in a space without stimulation and generate something from it. The ability to tolerate not knowing something immediately. That is increasingly rare and increasingly valuable. You adapted to more fundamental changes in a single decade than most generations face in a lifetime. Not because someone handed you a manual, because you had no other option, and because your analog childhood had already trained you to figure things out slowly and independently before the pace increased. That adaptability is not a personality trait. It is a built capacity. And when the world changes again, it already has. You know how to move with it. You watched the world your childhood was built on get replaced. You were not given a mourning period. The timeline moved forward and you moved with it. What that builds is not a generational label. It is something more specific. The perspective of someone who has lived inside more than one version of reality and knows from the inside how quickly everything permanent turns out to be temporary. Nobody handed you that. You built it in the gap between everything.